which will include a list of helpful and informative links. I'll also send this list out via email to everyone who registered tonight. Now, before we start, a little bit about Cornell Cooperative Extension. CCE serves residents of Rensselaer County by combining local experience and research-based education and solutions in the areas of agriculture, horticulture, 4-H youth development, and family and consumer science. We connect people to research-based solutions for real-world issues. CCE is part of the state and national land-grant university system and serves as the local community outreach for Cornell University. Lastly, any reference to brands or businesses is not an endorsement and is done solely for educational purposes. Now, let's get started with our presentations. I'd like to start out with a short video to set the stage of why we bird in the first place and why we might later want to get involved in citizen science projects. Let's watch the short video before I turn things over to Letitia and Eliza, who will walk us through some introductory steps on birding. And just bear with us for 1 second while we get this video queued up.
When you look into the eyes of a bird, it's very easy to suddenly recognize that is a living, breathing, conscious being. If there's one basic thing that the lab stands for, it's the idea that we have an opportunity to make a difference. The difference that we can make is brought about by the fact that we watch, we observe. That's fundamentally what science is. We're built around the idea that we're curious about how nature works. We're curious about how nature's doing. And the more we look, the more we listen, the more we understand. The fantastic thing about birds is they actually allow us access to the very little details of the living world. Because birds give us this microscope into how nature works so beautifully. We can look closely at how they interact with their food, with their shelter, with their places for nesting, and with one another. Birds give us access to how nature works in ways that most animals don't. There's art in nature and there's science in nature. And then there's the teaching that one can do from putting those together. And all of these ultimately culminate in the same place. We can't help singing about it because it's so spectacular. And that all comes from the fundamental human privilege we have. It starts with being able to see something, to listen to something, to think about it, and to reflect on it. There's nothing that's more beautiful and fulfilling and potentially explosively life-changing than simply observing nature.
Okay, thank you so much for watching that with me. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Letitia and Eliza, who will walk us through a PowerPoint on the introduction to birding.
Okay, well, thanks, Josh, for the introduction. The video was awesome. I was just like smiling just looking at it. Before we start, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Hopefully it's gonna work. Can you see my screen right now? Perfect. Well, thanks for the introduction. We're super happy to work with Josh and Bernie tonight. Maybe I can say a few words about myself and Audubon, and Eliza will introduce herself, and then we'll dig into the topic of interest of tonight. So my name is Laetitia Duré. I'm from France. I'm sure you can hear it very well. I started birding when I was in college. I went to a local preserve and I met the weirdest bird, like a European bittern. Basically, it looks like a heron trying to camouflage in a reed bed by staying perfectly immobile, head up. So quite a weird bird. And I did by showing a picture to a guide to know what it was. And I guess from there, I have never stopped taking pictures of birds to identify them and also share my passion with other people. And so when I moved to the US 3 years ago, I discovered a whole new world of birds. A great birding buddy in the person of Eliza, and I joined Audubon earlier this year to try to protect birds and their habitat at my small level. So about Audubon. So Audubon is a national organization to protect birds, and they have local chapters. The Audubon Society of the Capital Region is the local chapter around Albany and Troy. So the Audubon Society of the Capital Region, our mission statement is basically that we are a volunteer community which try to connect people to nature and inspires them to protect birds and their habitats today and tomorrow. And we are trying to focus on 3 main points. So bird conservation, sharing locally relevant science-based information from National and Audubon New York, and connect people to birds and wildlife, which is what we're gonna try to do tonight. We're gonna do that with Eliza, which is the best birding partner you can dream of.
Thanks, Leticia. My name is Eliza, and I am very happy to be here. This is exciting. And I am also really thankful for Leticia as an amazing birding companion and wonderful friend. And it's just really wonderful to work with her and with Josh and with Audubon. So I'm really happy to be here. And I am originally from Troy, and I currently live here still. Moved back to the area, and throughout all of my moves to different locations, I've just my interest in birding has grown significantly. I grew up watching the birds at the bird feeder outside my grandparents' house and my parents' house, so that kind of like started me on just being aware of my surroundings and the birds around me. But then as I've gotten older, I've joined on some birding outings, and now I just like go out on my own all the time or with Leticia. And so it's just fun to just always be discovering and learning about species that I've watched my whole life and learning new things about them, and then also just being amazed by the wide variety of other species that I had never known about before. So, but yeah, so we're happy to be here and tell you a little bit about how to start on your journey of birding. If this is a new thing to you, and if it's not, then hopefully it's just fun and hopefully you'll learn something. But yeah, so thanks for having us.
Okay, so we are gonna start. So again, this is an intro to birding, so apologies for the more experienced birders. But we are gonna focus first on where to start. So when and how do you see birds? Perfect. So regarding the when, there are a couple of different things that are important to know. Of course, dawn and dusk are the most interesting time to do birding, just because dusk is the time of day when birds need to go out and feed for their last meal before nightfall. Then they roost all night, and so they come out at dawn. So they'll try to, they need to eat before bedtime, as they will not be able to feed again until morning. So basically, it's a little bit less important when you're watching birds at your bird feeder. What is still true, though, is like birds tend to come by waves. And so you can start to look at your bird feeder and you'll see nothing, but just wait for a couple of minutes. Sometimes maybe 10 minutes will be enough, and you'll see all of them starting to come, and they'll all come at the same time. And another thing that you can do is you can sit down to minimize your physical presence, because just when you're standing up, you seem a little bit more like a threat to birds. So those are kind of basic things to keep in mind, and you should be able to see plenty of birds just by doing that at in your backyard, especially at your bird feeder. Yep. So the next part is about like how to use binoculars, and Eliza is gonna give you some useful details about that.
All right. So if you've never used a pair of binoculars before, hopefully this will be helpful. If you have, we're just reviewing some of the ways in which to use it. But basically, any pair of binoculars, as long as you can get it in focus, is going to be extremely helpful when identifying birds and just trying to observe your surroundings. I would say that the most important thing is to find a pair that works for you. There's all different types of magnification and lens sizes, and some people prefer different numbers and different magnifications and lenses. But really the best thing to do is try to find something that works for you. And a good place to start for that is to either borrow a pair that maybe a friend has, or you can also maybe head on down to Del Mar to one of the local bird stores, wildlife stores called Wild Bird Junction. And they often let you try out a pair of binoculars to make sure that it's a good fit for you. I personally like to use 8x42, and UTC uses 10x42. And basically the first number that I'm saying, 8 and 10, is it's the magnification. So it's going to be 8 times closer or 10 times closer. And then the second number is the size of the lens. And so the larger the number, the larger the lens to let in more light. And the light is actually extremely important when you're trying to bird, especially in the morning and in the evening when there's a lot of bird activity. So again, like I've used 8s and I've used 10s and I love them both. And so it's just kind of what you feel like is comfortable for you and the size of the binocular. But yeah, so those are some kind of starter points on that. And then as far as holding a pair of binoculars to feel stable, because that's also extremely important, is you want to, the binoculars open and close like this. And so you want to get it to the width for your eyes. And then there is 2 focusing points. There's one for the right eye piece, and then there's a fine-tuning focusing wheel up top. And so you want to get that right eye piece focused first. And you can do that by closing your left eye and then looking right through and turning that dial there. And then once you get that, then the fine-tuning focus on top is for if you're trying to look at something close to you or if you're trying to look at something further, and then that will help you get a crisp picture. And then also when you're holding those and you're focusing, you also want to have a steady hand. And so the best thing to do is this is kind of a strange demonstration, but you want to have your elbows in, and you can also kind of like lean them up against your chest a little bit, or you can always find like a tree or a fence or something to lean up against and use that as a way to become stable. Because if you're wiggling all around, it's going to be impossible, especially if like you're, I don't know, trying to see something very far away. But yeah, so being stable and getting things in focus, and then finding a pair of binoculars that works for you. And again, there's some resources for that with Locally, and then yeah, maybe like find somebody who has a pair to test theirs out and get some recommendations. So now that we've gone over the binoculars, so now that you like know how to focus with it and hold them and get them stable, we now need to implement that in the field. And so Leticia and I are going to go over some of the types of environments that you might be birding in. And one of those environments is an open environment, which is, you know, an open field or, you know, grasslands. And this is one of the easier environments to bird in because you don't have a lot of other distracting trees or bushes or anything. And so when you are birding in this open environment, and if you're walking along and you see something on like this image, like on a top of a fence post, the best thing to do is to maintain sight with your naked eye. And then once you've got it in your field of vision, you basically just take your binoculars and bring them directly up to your face without straying from your sight on that bird. And hopefully it will be this like amazing magical moment where this bird or the squirrel or whatever it is that you're looking at comes into your binocular field of view, and it's just like so crisp and detailed, and obviously you're gonna like fine tune your focus, but it's just this like such a fun feeling when you finally can see it through the binoculars. And this type of environment is actually quite easy to practice, either in your home or in your backyard. You can like set an object like a candlestick on the far end of your hallway, or you know, your bird feeder, or you know, your child or your cat or something who's sleeping, and just like look at it from far away and then just bring the binoculars right up. And that will be a good exercise to practice maintaining that naked eyesight and then bringing the binoculars up.
Okay, so sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's a little bit less easy, just like this time where I was with Eliza and like she spotted a great horned owl somewhere in the trees, well, like super far away, and I was like, I have no idea where it is, so she had to explain it to me, and then I had to find it with my binoculars. And it was pretty far away, so quite a challenging moment. So just to give you an idea, that's where the great horned owl is. So I didn't know if you saw it, if you see it, but there it is. So once you've got it with your naked eyes, it's basically like a spot far away. So the technique that Eliza and myself were using is you find an easy starting reference point with your naked eyes. So without the binoculars, you find a starting reference point. So for example, it could be this reddish tree in the foreground. And then you find a pathway to the bird, still with your naked eyes. And so in this case, it can be like you go up until you're into this spruce. And so basically, now that you have memorized with your naked eyes the pathway from the starting reference point, and you know how to get to your bird with that, you apply the exact same method Eliza was describing earlier. So you keep your starting point, you look at your starting point with your naked eyes, you bring your binoculars without looking down, and then you follow the pathway that you have imagined for yourself to get to the birds, and hopefully you'll find it. Maybe not. Sometimes you never find them, but it's about like exercising, and at some point you'll be able to find them. Okay, so now the next thing that we want to discuss with Eliza is to review a couple of clues that are important to gather when you're in the field. You spot a bird. Now you know how to spot a bird with your binoculars and when. Next step is, okay, I have spotted a bird and I'm interested to know what it is, to ID it. So basically you're gonna need to connect several clues. And so we're gonna cover the most basic one today. There are a lot more we could say, but we try to keep it short for tonight. So the very first clue we are gonna talk about is the date and location. So for the dates, there are a couple of reasons why it's important to know that you have seen this bird early December or maybe beginning of June. The first thing is birds don't always look the same between winter and summer. So they usually have a different appearance between the breeding season, so the summer, and the winter season. If we're talking about songbirds, for example, if you look at goldfinches, they look very different, at least the male, between summer and winter. That's the first reason why you want to look at the date you saw the bird. The second one is migration. So birds migrate. It can be short distance migration. It can be long distance migration. The reason why they do that is because they're basically moving from areas of low or decreasing resources to areas of high or increasing resources. So basically the resources I'm referring to are food and nesting locations most of the time. So birds that nest in the northern hemisphere, they tend to migrate northward in the spring to take advantage of burgeoning insect populations, budding plants, and an abundance of nesting location. And they don't stay in southern location to basically avoid competition. And as winter approaches and the availability of insects and other food sources decrease, the birds will move south again. And like it can be about escaping the cold. It's motivating factors for many species, but most of them, including hummingbirds, can actually withstand kind of very cold temperatures as long as they have like adequate supply of food. So that's also an interesting link with Josh's presentation in a couple of minutes about like bird feeding. So that's the reason why you want to note and to memorize when you saw the bird. The second clue is location. And location is kind of like heavily linked to the date. So the map that you see here, it's called the map range. Basically, it's usually present in most of birding guides. And it basically shows you where you can expect the bird based on the season. So for this map, it's the one for the American robin. And basically it tells you that people in Florida, they should not be able to see robin during summer, just because like it's in blue, and blue means that robin are there only during winter. So if you saw a robin in Florida, either you find a rarity, either it's not that, so you need to look at something else. So location and date are important to have in mind. And another reason about the location that is important is sometimes the robin, for example, in New York State, they're present year-round. That's the meaning of the violet color on this map. But they will have different behavior and different habitats between summer and winter. So basically, I personally see them less during fall and winter than during summer, because they during fall and winter they tend to spend their time in berry-bearing trees, and I don't have any in my garden, so I don't see them during fall and winter. The opposite example is dark-eyed juncos, for example. I saw them mostly during winter at the bird feeders because they appear to be a huge fan of suets, but they tend to disappear from my site, but they're still in New York State because during summer they move to forest habitats. So yeah, that's basically why you need to worry about date and location. Coming from France, it's also relevant to know in which continent you are, because we don't have the same birds, obviously, even though we do share some birds like the short-eared owls. And it's not something that we're gonna dig a lot into tonight, but habitat is highly crucial when you're looking at birds because different habitats host different birds. And that's it for me. And I'm gonna let Eliza introduce you to the second type of clue you need to collect on the field, sorry.
All right, thanks, Leticia. So our second clue is scale or size, and size to scale, I guess. So this is a very common scale that's used. This actually is sourced from the Merlin app, I believe, and so which we'll address later as a resource. But these are 4 birds that are commonly seen, and most people, oh, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people can identify these birds without being big bird fans or birders. So we've got the sparrow, we've got the robin, the crow, and a goose. And so these are great references when you're trying to place your unidentified bird in this scale. So it's, you know, if I'm seeing a bird for the first time, and I'm like close enough to it, I can get a good enough look at it through my binoculars with like trees and other things around it. I can say, oh, does that look like it's bigger than a robin or smaller, or like, oh, it's definitely bigger than a crow, or oh, it's really tiny. I think it's actually smaller than a sparrow. So these are really good reference birds to use as a resource when you're trying to identify what your bird is, because in most guidebooks or apps, they will ask the size, or they'll list the size. And so for like a robin is anywhere between 8 and 11 inches. And so if you're looking at a bird and you have an idea and you reference the book and it says it's, 16 to 20, then okay, it's definitely now more like a crow size. So it's extremely helpful. I use this all the time when I'm looking at new birds, and yeah, it's just a really great resource.
Also very useful when you're coming from the metric system and you're trying to describe a bird to a person in the US.
Yeah. When you have an image to go by instead of numbers, it's definitely helpful. If you're more of like a visual person, the scale is really helpful. And so that being said, since we're talking about scale, we're going to show you some images of 2 birds, and we want to see where you guys might place them on this bird scale.
So basically, if you want, you can use the chat and without unmuting yourself, you can use the chat and give us your guess for the downy woodpecker and the hairy woodpecker. And maybe Teresa, you can read the answer, because apparently I'm not able to display this chat and the my slides at the same time for some reason.
And these are really great birds to have up right now because they're pretty active this time of year. I know I see the downy and the hairy quite often. So, so if you have an idea of where they might fall.
Oh, there it is. I've got the answer, my bad. Okay, I do have an answer from so it doesn't say the name of the bird. Okay, downy between, oops, it's going way too fast. Downy between sparrow and robin. Airy around robin size from Eve. Should we check the answer, Eliza?
Let's check. Let's see what we've got.
And I apologize to all the people that have given answers. The chat is going way too fast.
Overwhelming participation.
I'm trying to move to the, oh, there it is. Okay, so it was true for the robin-sized, and yeah, like people are good.
Yeah, and just from photos, that's great. So either you're just good guess, or you've seen these before and can kind of visualize where they fall on the scale. So that's so. I mean, and this is really helpful to consider the scale because these are two birds that look very similar. And so if you can get a good enough view on them and compare them to their surroundings, then this will really help you narrow down which woodpecker it is. I know I sometimes have to like be like, oh, is it bigger or is it the smaller? Is it the bigger one or the smaller one? For someone who like knows my woodpeckers well, I still am like, is it bigger or is it smaller? So the scale is definitely helpful.
Okay.
And now the third clue as far as for identifying an unknown bird is color, and Leticia is going to tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So another interesting clue is definitely color. So you can start to work with the dominant color. So I'm not going to ask you what colors the goldfinch, the American goldfinch has. So obviously it's yellow and black overall color, right? But if you are not familiar with the goldfinch and you see this bird in the field and you get back to your place, let's say you try to use a search engine on internet to try to identify the birds, and you don't remember what the birds look like except it was yellow and black, and then you see all the options just in the US. And even when you factor this criteria, yellow and black, with the size, sometimes it's just not enough information to identify an American goldfinch, and it's going to be true for basically a lot of birds. So the option that you have is just to try to be a little bit more specific. So for example, regarding the American goldfinch, you're going to try to use like to be more specific on the location of the color. Are you talking about the head, the wings, the breast, the back, the tail, the butt of the bird? Sometimes it's useful. So it's going to be really helpful to be more specific. And just spoiler alert, you might not always be able to see all the body parts of the birds. Sometimes you won't even see what color it is because it will be like backlighted, and so it's okay. What you can do is try to move slowly if you can to get a better look at the birds from different sides. And if you don't see all, like, you're not able to describe the birds very specifically, it's okay. It's part of the game. No worries. It happens to, I mean, it still happens to me a lot. So as an example for the goldfinch, if you want to be a little bit more specific, if you want to be a little bit more specific, you can say that it has yellow on the head, on the back, so this part of the birds, on the breast, even though you can see it on this picture, and on the butt. I mean, yes, you can see the breast. And you can say that the black is on the wing, on the tail, and a little bit on the head. And yeah, that's a first way to describe the birds. And we're going to see that we can be even more specific with Eliza.
All right. So what do you do when you have two birds that you've seen that day and they're relatively the same size? They're both about the size of a sparrow, and they have very similar colors. So this is when the specific location of those colors is really important to help you identify what these birds are. So if you, so looking at these two birds, and we have all the markings listed that we're looking for. So we've got the overall color, we've got the head, the butt, the breast, the neck, the wings, and also paying attention to the leg color, the beak color. Those are even more specific details that are really helpful in discerning one bird from the other. So with that list and with these images, if you want to take some time and just give us what your observations of these two and where and how you would describe the differences between them.
Yeah. So again, you can use the chat, provide like the type of description you would try to memorize. And if you're willing to, you can also ID those birds if you already know them. But we're like trying to look at how would you describe them with their colors and their body parts, basically. And now I have access to the chat, so I should be able to see your answer.
And also these are two other birds that we often see this time of year as well.
At your bird feeders, which Josh is gonna talk about in a couple of minutes now.
And being like as specific as possible is really helpful. In a further slide, you'll see that like we always want to compile as much information as possible, because like even, and I'm just going to give away one of the differences, but even between these two birds, they both have black on their head, but the bird on the right, the black comes a little bit over its eye, and the bird on the left, it doesn't. So like even that is so, it seems, you can overlook it really easily, but it is one of those things that can really help you differentiate one bird from the other.
Okay, I have an answer from Dave that we're saying that the difference in beaks would be the first major difference outside of colors and also head and body shapes.
Absolutely. And let's see.
And I think this is the only answer so far. So somebody is saying Mary's talking about behavior. Also interesting answer. Eliza is going to talk about it in a minute. Anything else before Eliza gave some answers that might not be exhaustive, but
it might be.
Okay, we don't have any other answers, so I think you can go for it, Eliza.
All right. So yeah, so the differences obviously are, as mentioned, the beak size. So that's really helpful to notice that. And then the placement of the black, they are similar in that they both have black on the head, but like I said, one goes over the eye. The bird on our right has the black on the throat. They both have a little bit of rufous on their butt. And I do really like that one person mentioned the behavior. And that is a little bonus fact for our bird on the left. And Leticia, do we want to reveal what these are?
Yeah, sure. Up.
There we go. So our bird on the left, the white-breasted nuthatch, the really, whoops, I'm so sorry. The really noticeable difference between their behavior is that the nuthatch loves to walk down tree trunks. So it's like, it like goes upside down all the time. And it's a really obvious characteristic about this bird. And it is one of the most, I think, notable characteristics that makes it easy to identify.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, John and Deborah, for your for your description. You got it perfectly. So thanks a lot for taking part to this discussion. So now we can continue on the marks. And we have chosen like two birds that you'll see commonly at your bird feeder during winter. And if you go for a walk in the forest, you're likely to see them. So we talked about the size earlier during this talk. Let's say that you're not super confident about the size of the bird, not sure if it's the small one or the large one, just because you didn't see them in like side to side in a while, or just because, yeah, Barbara already got some kind of answers. Just so sometimes you're not completely confident about the size if you saw them from very far away. So what other clues could you use to tell the downy woodpecker apart from the hairy woodpecker? And again, you can use the chat. I'm gonna give the first, like one of the first answer that is coming from Barbara, sorry. And Mary and John and Deborah is the big size. So that's very true. So for the downy on the left side of this slide, it's about like 1/3 of the head of the downy, like the beak is 1/3 of the head in terms of length. On the hairy woodpecker sides, it's usually as long as the head of the hair of the woodpecker. So that's a good answer. Anything else? They do have a small difference regarding marks. Yeah, somebody is saying the size of the bird. So definitely, hairy is robin size, and the downy is the size of a house sparrow. So something else would be, so there is, okay, so somebody is saying eye markings. So I actually double checked that before this webinar. So on this two picture, it seems like there is a difference. But I double check on the Sibley guide, and it doesn't seem to be like some kind of difference between the two species. So it might just be an individual difference on these slides. No, so one of the other things that you can try to look at is, oops, my bad, is on their tail. Like if you look at the white part of their tail here, you'll notice that for the hairy woodpecker, there is no black spots, and the downy do have some black spots here. So that's another way, and probably not the most obvious one, especially if you're far away, but if you're watching them at your bird feeder, you can double check. The spots are always there for the downy. And another useful way is the call for distinguishing those two birds if you are just hearing them. Okay, well, that's all the clues that we wanted to go through as, again, basics when you start birding and you're not super familiar with those birds. So now I want to take a few seconds to mention if you're getting back from a walk or just watching the birds at your bird feeder, you have collected all those important clues that we have talked about. What kind of resources can you use to ID birds if you don't recognize them right away, which happens a lot of time, especially if you're new to birding. So there are a couple of different resources that we wanted to highlight. It's not exhaustive, and I'm going to go from the easiest one, or I would say if you're not really into birding and you occasionally want to identify a bird that you've seen. Josh will include a link to a chapter that a guide, sorry, that was made by a member of our chapter, Nicole, which lists 15 birds that are super common here in our area. So of course it's not exhaustive, but if you just want to learn 15 birds, it's perfect. And you do not get lost in a thick guidebook. A second way to identify a bird, and I've done that a lot when I started, you can use a search engine and you can try to type yellow and black birds in the USA and try to be more specific and like just check the images that you get for this description, and sometimes you can find your bird. It had worked for me. It's not the most relevant, but it can work if you don't want to invest in any app or guides. You can also reach out to birders. Just remember to be as specific as possible. Sometimes members of my family or friends will send me a picture, like random bird picture. I don't have any idea where the bird, where did they see the birds, or what size it was. So yeah, like sometimes like my partner's grandma sent me a picture and I thought it was like taken in the south of France, and it was actually from Singapore. So no way I could identify the bird with that level of information. So feel free to reach out to birders. They're always happy to share whatever they know. And you can reach out to the Audubon chapter, to our chapters through our email address. We'll be happy to try our best to help you. Another option is the Merlin app, which is, I find it amazing when I arrived in the US and I didn't know anything about the birds locally. So basically it's working with the same 5 clues that we have been talking tonight. So it will ask you basically to enter the date and location of your sighting, the size of the bird using the exact same scale that we have been using tonight. It will ask you the main colors of the bird. It's not going to ask you about like the specific body parts, just the main colors. And then it will provide you suggestions with pictures. And sometimes it's going to be enough to identify the birds. And it's free. You can download it on your smartphone, or you can use it online through the search engine on your computer. And the last option is to, if you're getting into birding, at some point you're going to need a guidebook. And so you have a different field guide. We have the Sibley, but there are probably a lot of very good guidebook out there that we're not aware of. And one thing that Eliza mentioned that she was doing a lot was once she has identified a bird, she spent some time looking at the similarities with other birds from the same family, because they're categorized in family within the guidebook. And it's working well. She's a great birder, so I would definitely do the same. Perfect. So before we let Josh continue, we just want to bring you on a little field trip. So Eliza.
All right. So given everything that we've talked about, our scale, our environment, our habitat, color, and specific markings, we are going to take you on this little field trip to actually try to observe a bird that is not quite in real life wild, but it's not a picture. We're going to show you a video. And we want you to use the chat and submit some of your observations as if you were collecting as much information as possible to then bring back and put either into the Merlin app or look through your guidebook or contact a birder. And to then try to identify this bird. So we'll play this video and submit some of your answers in the chat if you want, as far as the behaviors, size, color, and all that stuff that we've gone over. So let's see what you observe.
And just to give you a little bit of help, because there is no way you can know that, this video was recorded in Troy, New York, and in December 2019. Okay, so yeah, feel free to give us some inputs in the chat about how would you describe this bird, and if you know what kind of species it is already, you can also share about that.
And actually, this is a very cooperative bird.
Yep.
Sometimes birds are much more flitty, so this is actually giving us a very good stage to observe. Oh wow, it looks like a lot of people know what this woodpecker is. Oh, I just gave it away.
Okay, up. Oops, my bad. Nope. Come on. Stop moving.
All right, and it looks like we've got some specifics. A lot of people know what it is, but we've got some details. Can you tell I don't zoom very often, guys? But we've got orange head, molted black and white wings, white breast between the sparrow and robin size. That's what someone has put in. Black wings with white wing bars. Yeah, so a lot of people have figured out that this is a woodpecker, red-bellied woodpecker. So as Leticia said, it was recorded in Troy in December. So we will you may already see these birds around your yard, or if you're going for a walk through the woods or on a preserve. And its size is between a robin and a crow. So it's fairly big. We've got our white breast, black beak. We've got the red on the cap. And a very distinguishing characteristic is the kind of like ladder, like the stripes on the back of its wings. And then it's got some, similar to the markings on the downy woodpecker, it's got some spots on its wings as well, just kind of in a different, like more obvious in the back. And so with all this information, I mean, you guys have already identified it, but if pretend that we didn't know that it was a red-bellied woodpecker, we would take all this information and bring it back to our resources to try to identify it. And given all the information that you guys just submitted in your observations, say we were to do, to put it into the Merlin, let's see what would come up with all those details that we submitted. So this is what it would come up with the red on the cap and the stripes on the wings. And so now that you've kind of narrowed down your choices, then this gives you a good opportunity to then really pick out the one that it is, which we've already decided is the red-bellied woodpecker. But yeah, so you can see how like being very specific is really helpful, because even with all those details that we wrote down, our list is still pretty big. And for some other birds, it might even be bigger. Like if you're trying to identify warblers, that is like, you might submit all your information and you might have like 8 warblers that could match your description. And there might just be like one tiny little detail that's slightly different. So as specific as possible is really important. And again, we're kind of just going over like the very basic, like the starting ground. There's also like their song, their call, their behavior, their habitat, and then what they look like in the spring and what they look like in the fall and winter. And so there's a lot more that we can touch on, but this is like a really good place to start. And with just the size and the color and markings, you can actually identify quite a lot of birds, especially in your backyard if you're seeing them on a regular basis.
And just to, somebody mentioned, like suggested a red-headed woodpecker, and that like the colors, I mean, you have white, black, and red, and that's where the location and date is quite important. I double check on my guys while Eliza was talking. You can actually, you can see the red-headed woodpecker in New York State, but most of the time it's during summer or migration, but in December it's really not likely. So that's a very good illustration of our point. Thanks a lot.
And also the red-headed woodpecker is very rare to see as well. So that, and usually that's something that will come up with your searches. It's not a very common woodpecker to see. I only just saw it for the first time in my life like a year or two ago. And I have a specific location that I go to see it, and but I don't really ever see it like just out walking around. So, so learning more about how frequently seeing these birds are can also be really helpful too. And before we get into our questions, I just want to point out this absolutely beautiful photo that Leticia took of an indigo bunting. And this is a bird that its color is very obvious, but if it's not in the sun, it actually will appear to be black. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you might see it in the shade and be like, I saw this black bird with this kind of like stout, thick beak, but it's actually a bluebird. It's just the way that the sun is refracted out through its feathers that it appears to be blue. So anyway, it's a really beautiful photo and a really stunning bird. One of my favorites.
Well, if you have questions, we're maybe gonna take 4 or 5 questions, maybe just 4 because we have been longer than what we planned to be. I already saw one, so I can answer this one. and like, yeah, type your questions, and we can also answer them after Josh's presentation. So Barbara asked, what site was this? And I guess she was talking about the video for the red-bellied woodpecker, and so it was at my place, in the garden of our condo. So not very fancy, but yeah. Okay, I don't see much questions at the moment, so feel free to put them in the chat, and maybe we can let Josh talk and like take questions at the end of the Josh presentation if you have some, so we don't delay the presentation any more. Yep.
Okay, and I'm just going to start getting my screen shared here.
Yeah, I've stopped sharing on my side.
And thanks so much, guys, for letting us do that for you. That was fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation, and it's going to be entirely on backyard bird feeding. So welcome to Bird Feeding 101. This is your introduction to creating a successful bird feeding garden. These tips and suggestions are based on the experiences of thousands of bird feeding enthusiasts from across North America who participate in a project called Project Feeder Watch. These are volunteers that watch birds at their feeders and help scientists monitor the abundance and distribution of common feeder birds. Anyone can become a feeder watcher, and most of the photos in this presentation, including this white-breasted nuthatch showing off their peanut, were taken by project participants. So, simply providing food and shelter can be effective for bringing birds closer to your home. But how can you attract a diversity of birds to your yard? Which feeders should you use? What foods will attract the most species? How can you attract birds without spending a fortune on feeding the neighborhood squirrels as well? How can you make your yard a friendlier place for birds? And what can you do to keep birds safe while visiting your yard? These questions and more will be answered in this quick primer on bird feeding. So, why do tens of millions of Americans feed birds? First and foremost, feeding birds brings these spectacular animals into our backyards, allowing us to connect with them and helping us to appreciate nature. Feeding birds is also tons of fun. Who can resist watching the antics of a chickadee or a white-breasted nuthatch hopping around a tree? And attracting a colorful goldfinch or a cardinal to your yard can brighten even the gloomiest of days. While wild birds generally don't need the free food that we provide at bird feeders, in fact, studies show that the bulk of a bird's diet comes from natural sources, even where feeders provide plenty of food. One recent study I read indicated somewhere around 20% of a bird's diet will come from feeder stations when native food is also available. That said, birds do need us to protect their habitats, and making your yard or neighborhood more attractive to birds is a first step in ensuring that future generations can enjoy feeding birds as well. So the number of foods offered to wild birds continues to increase. In most areas, black oil sunflower is the best all-around choice for attracting a wide variety of species. Finches, chickadees, titmice, cardinals, nuthatches, and many other common feeder birds readily consume black oil sunflower. Safflower is superficially similar to sunflower, but fewer species consume it. It's most readily eaten by cardinals. Millet is a favorite of many ground feeding species, including sparrows, doves, and juncos. Corn, either whole or cracked, is attractive to pigeons and doves. Niger, not shown here, but will be shown in a upcoming slide, is another common food item that's favored by finches like the goldfinch, common redpoll, and purple finch. Suet, which is made from beef fat, is a favored food item of many woodpeckers and nuthatches. Unprocessed suet is available at most grocery store meat counters and from butchers. Today, however, many companies are selling prepackaged suet mixes that contain a wide variety of seeds, fruits, and other food items. They've made offering suet very convenient. Before we move on, while we're talking about bird food, I wanted to highlight that when you're shopping for bird food, it's really important to buy high quality feed. Often inexpensive bird seed has lots of fillers in it, things like oats and milo, which are often picked over and create a mess that you later have to clean up to keep your birds feeding in a safe and clean area. You really don't end up spending money on the long run when you buy inexpensive bird seeds, because a lot of those ground feeding seeds and fillers, oats, milo, millet, often end up picked through and uneaten on the ground when they're offered through hanging feeders. Besides the standard feeder fare, there's lots of other things that you can offer birds to get them into your yard. That said, bread should never be one of those items, as it has no nutritional value to birds and should really just be viewed as junk food. Maybe a very rare treat when the grandkids are around, but really that would be its only acceptable application. And even in that, you're really better off giving the birds something that will benefit them. And in addition, teaching the kids, if you are using bread to attract birds, that this is not something that will sustain the birds. We're doing this only to get a closer look. And then I teach the kids what the birds could benefit from eating. Fruit is another thing that you can offer that's consumed by tons of species, including robins, bluebirds, and mockingbirds. Fresh fruit like apples and oranges can be offered, and orioles are especially fond of oranges. Dried fruits can be eaten by these species as well. And of course, any fruit from fruit trees in your yard will attract and support birds in those areas. I also want to mention wild berries. All of your favorite berries that support you will support birds as well, both by providing food and shelter. One final food item before we move on slides, and that's insects. Mealworms are becoming increasingly popular. They're eaten by titmice and chickadees and are one of the only ways I know of to get a bluebird to come up and visit a feeder where you might get a closer look. So when looking at feeders, there are tons on the market. There's so many, it's staggering. To attract the greatest diversity of species, maintain several different types of feeders, different types of designs that have different food items. All of your feeders should meet a few basic requirements. They should be easy to clean and to refill, sturdy enough to last. They should not have any parts that are sharp, easy to break, or could harm birds in any way. A feeder's job is really to keep seed clean and dry. I look for feeders that have large roofs that I know will protect the seed in them as best as possible. And a final warning, be conscious of where you're hanging your feeders. If you're attaching them to a house, make sure they're not in the drip line where they're going to be wet. If you're hanging them under a tree, it's a good idea to go out in the rain and make sure that rain isn't being channeled down directly onto your feeder. The next few slides are going to give you an idea of the huge assortment of feeders that are out on the market. For instance, this one's a hopper feeder, which is a platform with walls and a roof that forms a hopper that protects seeds fairly well against the weather and less well against squirrels. Hoppers are attractive to most species of feeder birds, from small birds like chickadees to large birds such as jays. Most hoppers hold a good quantity of seed, but few are weatherproof, so the food might get wet and moldy if it sits out for a few days. Tray or platform feeders are any flat raised surface that you spread bird seed on. They attract most species of feeder birds, but they offer no protection against squirrels, chipmunks, rain, or snow. Tray feeders placed near the ground are mostly likely to attract ground feeding birds like doves, juncos, and sparrows. Be sure these feeders have plenty of drainage holes, and if you're buying them, most come with a screened mesh bottom. Okay, nectar feeders, also known as hummingbird and oriole feeders, are generally made from a bottle with a tube or small ports that the birds can access nectar through. The feeders are made of glass and plastic and tend to have small mesh guards over the feeding ports to restrict access to bees and ants. Some also have little built-in reservoirs that create a moat to prevent ants from actually getting inside the feeder and fouling the nectar inside. When you're looking to buy a hummingbird feeder, make sure that it's easy to take apart and clean, because they should be washed really frequently. You can make your own nectar at home, and I'd advise doing that as opposed to buying any that may be colored red. The most appropriate hummingbird food is really made just by mixing 1 cup of hot water with a 1/4 cup of sugar. You should change the nectar that you create every 3 to 5 days to prevent mold and deadly fermentation that can occur in hummingbird feeders. And really, if you can't make sure that you can get out and maintain those feeders every 3 to 5 days, you are better off just not putting up hummingbird feeders at all, because that sugar can turn into some nasty stuff if left too long. So it's important to keep this type of feeder especially clean. For anyone who's made their own nectar, it can be a little bit of a pain and not something that I'd want to do every 3 days. And for that reason, I tend to keep a jug of it in my refrigerator, which can last for about 2 to 3 weeks in that way. And that way I can refill my feeder every 2 days or so with a little bit less fluid, and make sure that no bacteria or mold gets in there that can sicken the birds that I'm looking to help. Okay, tube feeders are a hollow cylinder made of plastic and metal with multiple feeding ports and perches. They keep seed fairly dry, and they're often somewhat squirrel resistant. The species of birds attracted to a tube feeder depends on the size of the perches under the feeding ports. Short perches accommodate small birds like finches, but exclude larger birds such as grackles or jays. At least that's the hope in theory. I have seen jays able to perform some acrobatic maneuvers to land on even the smallest of perch. Looking at these tube feeders, they're one of the most popular and practical bird feeders on the market for good reason. They hold a ton and protect seed fairly well. But that said, they're not perfect. Often the seed below the bottommost port, it can't be reached by birds because it's so low, and it ends up breeding mold and bacteria. If you take a look at the feeder on the left that's being visited by the acorn woodpeckers, you can see that area. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that bottom inch and a half is seed that's inaccessible and will go bad uneaten by the birds. If that's not dumped out, it'd be a great breeding ground for bacteria. When we look at the feeder on the right with this painted bunting, you can see where it's perched, and then this curved bottom that makes it so no seed that's inaccessible to the bird is sitting at the bottom of the feeder where it can go bad and make it sick. Now, the good news is if you already have a feeder that has one of these catches at the bottom, you can easily fix that just by blocking the bottom of the feeder. You can find something from your recycling bin that will probably fill that space and prevent bacteria from forming in that bottommost patch. Okay, as promised, Niger, also known as thistle seed, can be offered in a specially designed feeder. One type is this sock, which is pictured on the left, which can attract a whole assortment of birds. Niger is preferred by finches like the goldfinch, pine siskins, and common redpolls. I should also include Niger's imported from Africa and Southeast Asia, and it's sterilized before we buy it in these little seed bags, and it's not responsible for the spread of an invasive species called thistle, which we often use the terms interchangeably, but when we're offering birds bird seed, we're offering them sterilized Niger seed, where the invasive weeds on the edges of our garden are a form of thistle. Before I move on, I'm really fond of Niger feeders. And for anyone who's only offering maybe sunflower seed or suet at this point, offering Niger seed will bring a whole slew of new visitors to your feeding station. So I'd really advise if you want to try something new, one of these inexpensive socks is a great starting point to figure out what you can attract offering this food. Suet, it can be offered in wire mesh cages or plastic bags like old onion bags. Occasionally, a suet feeder can attract unwanted birds or species that you might not want to be feeding, like starlings. There are suet cages that have roofs or covered tops and are starling resistant. The starlings can't grab a hold, but your woodpeckers and nuthatches will still be able to hang upside down, like this downy woodpecker in the bottom right-hand corner, and still get at the good stuff that you're putting out for them. So while suet's almost guaranteed to attract woodpeckers, other birds that may not normally visit a feeder station may also stop in and try out suet. So species not normally considered feeder birds, like the pine warbler, western tanager, may eat suet, especially in the cold months when insects are scarce. Peanut feeders. Peanuts can also be fed to birds. Shelled peanuts are readily eaten by woodpeckers and nuthatches, and peanuts in the shell are favored by jays, and they may be stored for later consumption. A bit of a warning, they are also a favorite of chipmunks and squirrels, so expect to have a little bit of competition. Peanut hearts and pieces are likely to attract chickadees and Carolina wrens. You can also make your own feeder. It's a fun project, especially for kids, and there's a ton of directions online where you can find directions on how to make your own feeders. One really fun and easy way to do this is just to fill holes in dead trees with either suet and or peanut butter and birdseed, and birds will be sure to come and excavate those cavities that you have filled. Well, I've mentioned squirrels, so it's time to talk about baffling them. No matter where you live, if you feed birds, you will interact with squirrels as well. Squirrels are often the #1 challenge for people feeding birds, and they can consume a ton of bird food and can be really destructive by chewing holes in your bird feeders. Squirrels continue to outsmart humans by defeating our anti-squirrel efforts. However, there's a number of tricks that can help you gain the upper hand on these athletic and hungry rodents. So one option is to try squirrel baffles by creating a barrier between the squirrels and your feeders. Baffles come in all shapes, sizes, and materials, but their purpose is really to keep squirrels from reaching your feeders. Often cone-shaped baffles are hung either below feeders to prevent a squirrel from approaching from the ground, or above feeders to prevent an attack from the trees. Baffles need to be large enough to prevent the rodents from reaching around the barrier. They also need to be mounted high enough to prevent squirrels from jumping past the baffle. For instance, baffles in this photo are mounted on top of the feeders to prevent squirrels from reaching the feeders from above. A good design for a smooth pole feeder station. Here we see baffles mounted on the poles below the feeders to prevent the squirrels from climbing up from the ground. It appears that the baffles are doing the job with all the squirrels on the ground and none on the feeders, just a couple birds. A final note on this slide, note that the feeders are placed far from the tree line, away from the benches, trees, or anything that the squirrels could use to jump off of and past those baffles to get to the bird seed. Another option is to buy feeders that are resistant to squirrels. Some come wrapped in a mesh barrier like the one pictured that prevents squirrels from reaching the seeds. Small birds can slip through the mesh and feed, but larger birds get left outside with the squirrels. In my attempts to defeat squirrels, I have found that the birds will visit this type of feeder only when the ones that are easier to access without flying in and out are empty. If I let those go empty, this style of feeder will get used, but it seems, in my experience, it's the one that the birds visit as a last priority. Remember that no feeder is completely squirrel-proof. Houdini here has managed to find his way inside this seemingly impenetrable bird feeder. There's many squirrel-resistant feeders on the market, but the squirrels always find a way to kind of come out on top. There's the current popular viral video that depicts a young man who kind of creates a squirrel feeding gauntlet in his backyard. If you've seen it already or plan on viewing it in the future, just a quick spoiler alert, the squirrels always win. They always find their way to the seed, no matter what. Another option is to just simply surrender and feed the squirrels. Installing a squirrel feeder some distance from your bird feeders can distract the squirrels that would normally be in competition with your birds for the bird seed at your bird feeders. However, if your squirrel population is really high or your food supply runs low at the squirrel headquarters, you can bet the rodents will promptly move back over to your bird feeding station. And really the key in this is to make the squirrel station more attractive to the squirrels than the bird food, and offering some corn and nuts is a really strong way to entice the squirrels to a different area. So other feeder visitors, when you put out food to attract birds, be prepared for other wildlife to show up as well. These pictures show a few lucky or not so lucky people who've had moose and elk come to their visitors. You're not likely to see elk or moose come to your feeders, but it is a possibility. The raccoon in the bottom right-hand corner, very abundant in our area. Chances are one will visit your feeder station at some point in time. If you happen to see a black bear on a platform feeder in your backyard, it's probably a good idea to stop feeding the birds until the bears are finally hibernating. Good news is that that happens once nights get super cold. We're in a nice cold stretch now where I'd expect the bears to not be active. And January 1st is typically a safe bet for black bears to all be in their form of hibernation. So creating bird-friendly habitat. Creating an attractive environment for common feeder birds is as easy as providing shelter, food, and water. Birds need to feel safe in order to come to our feeders, and providing shelter can help them escape predators and harsh winter conditions. Evergreen trees and shrubs provide excellent shelter, and a large brush pile is also a favored refuge for backyard birds. You can encourage birds to nest in your yard by providing nest boxes. Many common feeder birds, such as chickadees and titmice, readily nest in birdhouses. Bluebirds are also likely to inhabit backyard birdhouses, provided they're built to their specifications. Reminder, bluebirds can also be attracted to your feeders by offering mealworms in addition to the standard seed. So birdscaping your yard with native vegetation is an excellent way to attract more birds. Birdscaping involves growing plants with birds in mind. Growing a variety of native plants that provide food, shelter, and potential nest sites will attract the greatest diversity of bird species. Some plants to consider include perennials like asters, black-eyed Susans, and annuals like sunflowers for their seeds. Tubular-shaped nectar-producing flowers for hummingbirds should be offered. Small trees and fruiting shrubs, such as crabapple, dogwoods, viburnums, and serviceberries for their fruits, and conifers, such as pines and spruces that provide cover, seeds, and nesting sites. Dead vegetation is really important too. Waiting until spring to clean up any flower gardens provides a winter seed source for birds, as well as perch sites throughout the winter. Brush piles are a favorite refuge for feeder birds evading predators, like hawks. And for those who don't want to create a brush pile in close proximity to their feeder station, this is a really great time of year to find discarded trees on the side of the road. There are discarded Christmas trees everywhere about 2 weeks from now that provide excellent cover just by laying them on their side or sticking them in the snow. Once we have them, you have some instant temporary winter shelter for birds visiting your feeder station. On to water. Water is one of the most effective ways to attract many species of birds, even those that wouldn't consider visiting a feeder station. Running water is particularly attractive to birds. A small garden pond with a waterfall or a small drip from a bucket into a bird bath will bring a wide variety of birds to your yard. Finding unfrozen water in the winter is a particular challenge for birds in the Northeast during the winter. There's lots of companies that offer heating elements that are designed to keep bird baths free of ice, and they're highly recommended to those looking to support a diversity of birds in their yard. So keeping your birds safe. If you're attracting birds to your yard, you're responsible for reducing the threats the birds face while they're visiting your feeders. A number of potential dangers exist that you should be aware of. At some point, the bird activity at your feeders is likely to attract a bird-eating hawk, such as a sharp-shinned hawk or Cooper's hawk. You may welcome the close-up view of these fantastic birds, but some people become upset if the hawk eats or scares their feeder birds away. If you'd like to discourage hawks from visiting your yard, try taking your feeders down for a few days. Your feeder birds will disperse and the hawk will likely move on. Your songbirds will quickly return once the food supply is put back up. Also, be sure to provide adequate cover for songbirds in your yard, such as dense shrubs, piles of brush, or discarded Christmas trees. These all provide places for birds to escape from predators. On to disease. There's a number of bird diseases that affect wild birds, and some can be spread when birds congregate at feeders. Birds can become ill from leftover bits of seeds and seed holes that grow molds and bacteria. Bacteria can also thrive on the bird droppings that accumulate on and around feeders. To maintain a healthy feeding garden, clean your feeders every 2 weeks. Many bird feeders are dishwasher safe, and that can be a great way to sterilize them. If your bird feeders aren't dishwasher safe, give them a good scrubbing, wash them thoroughly in soapy water, and then soak or rinse them in a solution of 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Always make sure that your feeders are dry completely before refilling them and putting them back out so that the food remains dry. Make sure if you're putting out hummingbird feeders, they should be cleaned at a minimum of once a week. Every 5 days is even better. And I mentioned when you purchase low quality seed or seeds that have fillers or even seeds that species of birds not commonly found in the Rensselaer Plateau consume, a lot of that can end up uneaten on the ground. When it does, that mat again grows mold and bacteria. So one of your final jobs is to rake all of that stuff up that accumulates under the feeder. You're going to have to do that no matter what, but purchasing high quality bird seed will mean you're doing it a bit less frequently. One last thing, since bacteria and disease need proximity and contact in order to be spread, keeping your feeders spread a bit apart, not having them too close together, and having multiple feeders some distance apart, again, and offering multiple forms of seed will help the birds to socially distance, if you will, as they visit our feeding stations, and it will help support their health. Okay, cats. Cats are the most numerous pet in North America. Unfortunately, they do kill hundreds of millions of birds each year. Keeping your cat indoors will help keep your feeder birds safe, limit your cat's exposure to diseases, parasites, and poisons, keep your cat safe from other dangers such as cars and other animals, and result in a longer, healthier life for your cat and the wildlife in your yard. To learn more about outdoor cats and their impact on bird populations, please visit the website of the American Bird Conservancy. Finally, windows. Millions of birds are killed each year by colliding with windows that are perceived as pathways through buildings. Placing your feeders more than 30 feet from windows usually limits collisions. It does make it harder for viewing from your home, of course, without binoculars. Fortunately, we were very well coached on how to better use binoculars from our windows earlier today. If you do need I should say, if you do choose to place your feeders closer to the house so that you can better view, the closer you place them to the house, the better. We recommend placing feeders within 3 feet of your windows. And the reason for this is that if a bird is scared away from the feeder at a distance of 3 feet, they don't have enough time in flight to build up the speed or momentum that would be needed to cause injury when they strike the glass. You can further reduce window strikes by installing window awnings and screens, fastening hawk silhouettes or other objects to windows to break up reflections of surrounding areas. You can close the blinds while you're gone during the daytime, which will also help on heating and cooling costs. And for problematic windows, consider attaching bird netting, like the window shown in this picture. This is the type used to keep birds away from things like blueberry bushes. I choose to take my netting off after I have a few quarts in the freezer and leave the rest for the birds. But with this method, birds will actually bounce off the netting and in general be able to fly away unharmed. For those interested, we will be offering a webinar next month that will focus exclusively on preventing bird collisions with windows, and we'll also focus on the 20 most common bird feeder visitors for our region. Okay, this has been a quick introduction of bird feeding. If you'd like to learn more, there's tons of resources available. Hundreds of books and websites provide a wealth of information about bird feeding. We recommend the Feeder Watcher's Guide to Bird Feeding and Birds at Your Feeder. Both of these books have drawn on the experiences of thousands of Project Feeder Watch participants. Also, it's extremely helpful to have a field guide handy to help you ID birds at your feeder, but beware, this hobby can be addicting. Finally, you may consider taking part in Project Feeder Watch. You certainly don't have to be an expert birder to help scientists to learn more about bird populations. All you need is a feeder and some seed. When you sign up for Project Feeder Watch, you'll receive all of the materials that you need to participate, including a handy poster to help you identify all of the common feeder birds. One of the links that will be sent out at the end of this presentation will have a link to the digital form of this poster. Project Feeder Watch is a joint research and education project of the Cornell Lab of O, Bird Studies Canada, Audubon, and the Canadian Nature Federation. To learn more about feeding birds and Project Feeder Watch, visit their website at www.birds.cornell.edu/PFW for Project Feeder Watch. Okay, we are at the end of that PowerPoint. I've not had my eyes on comments. Did any comments happen to come in either for Letitia and Eliza or for myself throughout that presentation? Let me go down and take a quick.
Some questions about the cats coming to the feeders. Any other thoughts on how to keep them away?
So I don't know of a way to keep birds safe from cats at a feeder station outside of keeping cats indoors. The more I've thought about ways to best feed birds, I've been tempted to build like some little bird feeding kiosk where I have a giant roof that would protect all of the birdhouses under it from the weather and potentially speed things up. So I'm sure that if time and money were no option, you could probably devise a kind of netted area. And if you think of the feeder that I showed that depicted squirrel baffling that the squirrel had managed to slide through, something similar could probably be constructed that would keep cats out of the feeding area and still allow the birds access. That said, cats are predators to the bone, and they would still likely be waiting outside that structure, waiting for the birds to fly in and out. So as long as hunters are in the area, they will do their thing and continue to hunt. Does anyone have a different take? Or
I would maybe guess that if you try to, the same thing that you mentioned for the squirrel, like not trying to have the bird feeder too close to like branches or trunk. I know that it's like one of the recommendation for bird houses. So I would, maybe it can also help with bird feeders. Probably, I mean, the risk won't be zero, but might help.
okay, were there any others?
So Eric, oops, sorry. Start again. Eric, who is also from Audubon, is also saying keeping the feeders away from any potential places they could pounce from. I don't see other question. I know that while you were talking, we had question on the chat about like somebody asking about where do we have orioles during winter in New York? And so Teresa and I mentioned that they tend to they winter in South America, and you can also find them in Florida, Georgia, and the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. So in case people weren't reading the chat and listening to Josh, those are some of the questions we saw.
Okay, so are we out of questions?
Yes.
I know we're way over time, so I'd like to thank you all at this point for joining us tonight. You can find out more about all that we do by visiting our website at ccerensselaer.org, and be sure to visit our Facebook and Instagram pages. Just look for CCE Rensselaer County. Feel free to reach out to us at any time through our county email at rensselaer@cornell.edu. For natural resource specific questions or information, feel free to reach out to me directly at jp844@cornell.edu. I love helping others to get close to nature, and I'm here to help. Finally, I'd like to thank Letitia, Eliza, Teresa, Krista, and the Audubon Society of the Capital Region for providing their vast experience on birding and their willingness to partner with Cornell Cooperative Extension to make this presentation possible. You can contact the Audubon Society at info@capitalregionaudubon.org. Be sure to visit their website at www.capitalregionaudubon.org to learn more about their amazing work, and check out their Facebook and Instagram pages by looking for Capital Region Audubon. Our final thanks for the evening is to all the participants who attended tonight due to their desire to observe and protect nature and wildlife. Thank you for attending, and be sure to look out for our next presentation in January, which will focus on preventing bird-to-window collisions and cover some of the most likely feeder visitors for our region. Thank you again, and we hope to see you next month.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.